At exactly 2:04 a.m., the whole neighborhood went dark. Not the lights, the grid, the brain, the eyes, the soul of the place. Motion sensors froze, garage doors got stuck like they were holding a grudge, and every single security camera went blind, right in the middle of an active police chase. Turns out the corner bank had been hit, and while sirens were screaming down Oak Ridge Boulevard, our system was taking a nap. But you know what didn't nap? Beverly Klein's selfie game. Yep. Our HOA president was perched on my roof, smiling into her phone like she'd just defused a bomb with a Pinterest board. She wasn't holding a wrench or a walkie-talkie, no. Beverly was wielding a paint roller and a bucket of beige latex, slapping fresh strokes over the solar panels that powered the entire neighborhood surveillance grid. It was the kind of image that belongs in a modern art museum under the title Suburban Delusion in 3 Shades of Dumb. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're tuning in from. I'm always curious who's watching these wild HOA sagas unfold. And hey, if you love stories with real stakes, twisty truths, and just the right dose of suburban scandal, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's tale? Even messier. And trust me, what's coming next? You're gonna want front row seats. Now, I'm not usually the guy who wakes up in a sweat over HOA drama, but that night I was bolted out of bed by a sound I hadn't heard in years. My backup system alarm. The kind of noise that says, "Hey, buddy!" The 21st century just took a lunch break and left you with a pager from 1996. I stumbled into my office, checked the servers, and saw exactly what I feared. Solar input, 0. Dead. Gone. Not a flicker. At first I thought maybe a bird had fried itself on the panel again. Happens more often than you'd think. But then I pulled up the roof cam. What I saw was beige. Not just beige, fresh, shiny, glistening beige, like someone had tried to soothe the sun itself. And right there in the footage was Beverly, leopard print leggings, sunglasses at night, humming an opera remix while she painted the grid into irrelevance. Is the kind of moment that makes your brain glitch. Part sitcom, part security breach. See, 5 years ago, back when this place still made sense, the HOA quietly approved a solar-powered surveillance system. Break-ins had spiked, folks were nervous, and instead of going full Fort Knox, I proposed a network powered by rooftop panels, running through my home, discreet and efficient. We kept it quiet for security reasons. I installed it, maintained it, and even waived most of my fees because, unlike Beverly, I actually gave a damn about this community. But Beverly didn't just ruin my roof, she sabotaged the whole system. Cameras, motion sensors, backup lighting, everything. Down. And while I was pulling up error logs and trying to figure out what still worked, the rest of the neighborhood was waking up to a series of very personal malfunctions. Mr. Delgado's garage door wouldn't open. The Jenkins dog slipped through an autogate glitch and vanished into the fog. The sprinkler system on Parkview Lane watered the asphalt for 3 straight hours like it was trying to baptize the street. Meanwhile, Beverly was living her best influencer life, posting selfies with captions like neighborhood glow-up and tagging the HOA like she was applying for sainthood. I didn't even know what to feel. Anger, disbelief, maybe a dash of admiration for how confidently wrong a person could be. So I marched to her house, still half in my pajamas, and she opened the door in a robe that screamed 1950 detergent ad. Before I could say a word, she raised her finger like a maestro about to cue the brass section and said, "I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you about those hideous black panels. They're such an eyesore, and honestly, they're bringing the whole property value down." She said it like she was doing me a favor, like beige paint was some kind of miracle cure for aesthetics. I told her, as calmly as I could, that those panels powered the entire security system. Her smile twitched, but she recovered fast, told me I was exaggerating, said she thought they were just your little power toys. So I showed her the footage. Her, on my roof, with the paint, humming like she was on HGTV. And what did she do? She denied it, then she deflected, then she attacked. Classic Beverly. Said the HOA never approved any security system, said it was illegal to host something that sophisticated without documentation. I told her the contract was signed by the previous board and I had the paperwork filed away. She smirked and said, "Well, good luck finding it." And that's when it clicked. She knew. She knew exactly what the panels were for. And she didn't just paint them to be cute. She painted them to kill the system. Because in her mind, control doesn't mean keeping people safe. It means being the one who decides what gets seen and what disappears. And at that moment, standing in front of her smug, powdered face, I realized this wasn't about roof paint. This was about erasure. And Beverly wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat, with a Pinterest password and a plan. If you ever want to see the perfect collision between arrogance and ignorance, just watch someone confidently destroy a system they don't understand, then smile like they've solved world peace. That was Beverly Klein, standing on my roof in leopard leggings, painting my solar panels beige like she was Michelangelo redecorating a church ceiling with house paint from aisle 5. When I told her, nicely, at first, that those panels weren't some backyard decoration but the power source for the neighborhood's entire encrypted surveillance grid, she tilted her head like a confused golden retriever and said, "Oh, I thought those were just your personal solar things." Personal? As if I'd wired an entire block of security cameras to run on vibes and ego. She had no clue those panels were the only reason half the homes here hadn't already been robbed, or why the HOA used to quietly funnel maintenance payments through my system. She wasn't just clueless, she was fearless about being clueless, which is the most dangerous kind of leadership you can have. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't wave the footage in her face. I just walked her through it like I was explaining multiplication to someone holding a calculator upside down. I told her the system had been approved 5 years ago by the previous HOA board, that they'd signed a contract, paid for installation, and agreed to keep the hosting anonymous. She blinked slowly, then smiled, tight and rehearsed, and said she had no record of any such contract. I told her I had a paper copy filed in a fireproof cabinet, signed by 3 board members, including the former VP and treasurer. Her smile didn't fade. It sharpened. "Well, if it exists," she said, "it should have been submitted again when the new board took over. Otherwise, it's null." I knew what she was doing. This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was strategy. If she couldn't erase the system physically, she'd bury it bureaucratically, because once the paperwork disappears, the story dies with it. That's how people like Beverly operate. They don't argue facts, they argue visibility. If something can't be proven on paper, it might as well never have happened. So I went home. I opened my locked filing cabinet, top drawer, 4th folder from the left, the one labeled Surveillance Grid, HOA approved, 2018. Only it wasn't there. Not misplaced, not accidentally filed under S. Gone. In its place, a fresh sheet of printer paper with a fake HOA letterhead and no signature. It claimed the Solar Surveillance Initiative had been discontinued and no longer falls under HOA protection. There was no approval vote, no timestamp, no author, just a single sheet pretending to carry the weight of 5 years of agreement. My stomach dropped. That cabinet isn't some flimsy side drawer, it's locked. Physical key, no digital keypad. I live alone. There's no plausible explanation, no visitor, no helper, no emergency call. That explains how that document got replaced. It didn't fall out, it got removed. And someone replaced it with a forgery so bland, so generic, it might as well have been printed with disappearing ink and plausible deniability. Beverly didn't just paint the panels. She was scrubbing the record. Digitally, emotionally, legally. It's one thing to sabotage a system. It's another to erase its origin story. She hadn't just taken out the power. She was gutting the infrastructure by erasing its memory. I opened the digital backups, hoping it was just a scare. I'd scanned every document after the original signatures were collected, stored them in encrypted folders with multi-key access, and backed them up to 2 external drives. Thank God I'm paranoid. The digital versions were still there, time-stamped, signed, and complete. But they weren't enough. Not for a community that's trained to believe paper more than screens. People trust manila folders. They trust wet signatures. Screenshots feel optional, editable, fake, and Beverly knew that. Which meant I needed more than just digital records. I needed someone else who'd been there, someone who had touched the paper, signed the contract, attended the meeting, someone who remembered, not just the project but the purpose behind it. Meanwhile, Beverly was doubling down online, posting new photos with captions like, "Restoring beauty to our community, one rooftop at a time," as if she hadn't just taken down the one system keeping everyone's porch lights flickering at night. She added hashtags like curb appeal and eyesore begone, tagging the HOA like it was a fashion brand and she was their beige ambassador. It was all there, smiling selfies, neutral color palettes, and not one word about the dozens of residents now experiencing garage door malfunctions, unresponsive alarms, and pets escaping through broken gates. She was painting the story the way she painted my panels, broadly, blindly, and without permission. And the worst part? It was working. People started asking questions. Not about her, but about me. Was the system legal? Was I running it for personal gain? Why had it been kept a secret? How come the HOA records didn't reflect it anymore? The narrative was shifting, one post at a time. And Beverly, armed with a smartphone and selective memory, was rewriting the history of the grid and of me. So I printed everything I had, not just the contracts, but the maintenance logs, the emails, the original board minutes approving the system. I gathered it into folders, 3 copies, and started preparing a backup presentation. But before I went public, I needed backup, the human kind. People who were there when this began, people who could stand in front of a room and say, "Yes, this happened. Yes, we approved it." And I knew exactly where to start. Phil Rourke, the former HOA vice president, had been on the board when the deal was made. He lived 3 streets over and left after a screaming match with Beverly about a landscaping invoice she'd doubled without notice. If anyone remembered the solar system and the signatures, it would be Phil. And if Beverly thought she could bury this entire history under beige paint and smug denial, she was about to learn what happens when you mess with someone who doesn't just keep receipts, he archives them. And in the next part, those receipts are coming back with names, voices, and more memory than a hard drive ever could. And trust me, you're going to want to see what happens when Phil walks back into the picture, because the moment he opens his old filing box, this HOA fairy tale starts falling apart real fast. So, if you're hooked on stories where the truth refuses to stay buried under beige paint and bad intentions, make sure you hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop a comment telling me what your HOA horror story looks like. The next part? Oh, it gets juicier. Because receipts are powerful, but witnesses bring the fire. I've always said if you want the truth, don't ask the internet, ask someone who still uses a filing cabinet. After Beverly's beige sabotage and that fake termination letter magically appearing where my HOA contract used to live, I knew I had to find the original. Lucky for me, I've always backed up my backups. Buried deep in an old drive labeled HOA_2018_archive_final_final, I found it. Scanned copies of the full agreement, complete with every signature, treasurer, secretary, and right there in clear ink, Phil Rourke, vice president of the board, back when people actually read what they signed. I stared at his name for a long second, thinking about the last time I saw him storming out of a community BBQ while Beverly claimed he'd overwatered his lawn into a code violation. At the time, it seemed petty. Now, it felt like the prologue to a coup. That contract proved everything. But contracts are paper. And paper's only powerful when the people who signed it are still around to point and say, "Yep, that's real." And Phil? He was the last one left. I still had his number in an old HOA contact sheet, printed, 3-hole punched, and laminated because that's the kind of person I am. I called once. No answer. Called again. He picked up. His voice was lower than I remembered, slower, like a man who's gotten used to quiet days and no surprises. But the moment I mentioned Beverly, he went sharp. Not angry, more like alert, like a dog that hears thunder before you feel it. He remembered the system, remembered the vote. He even remembered how Beverly used to call the panel's energy clutter, and when I told him what she'd done, the paint, the erased file, the phony letter in my cabinet, he didn't gasp or curse. He just said, "I told Nora this would happen. Should have burned my minutes into stone." That's when I knew this wasn't just one HOA president on a power trip. This was a slow-motion takeover that had started the moment the old board stopped watching. And now that someone finally noticed, it was time to light up the past. Phil still had his documents. Old agendas, meeting notes, votes recorded on ruled notebook paper. He said, "Give me a night. I'll bring it all." So I scheduled a community meeting. Not one of those boring HOA updates where someone complains about trash bins and someone else yells about dogs off leash. No, this one had teeth. I used the neighborhood group chat, the same one Beverly used to flood with lawn care tips and passive-aggressive shout-outs, and posted a quiet message. "HOA, emergency meeting, 6 p.m. sharp. Evidence will be presented. Your home security depends on it." Within hours, the RSVP emojis were stacking up like angry Skittles. People were fed up. They weren't just annoyed that Beverly painted my roof. They were worried about what else she'd painted over. And when neighbors start asking what's real and what's performance, that's when a leader's smile starts to slip. That night, the rec center was packed. Folding chairs dragged out from dusty corners, folks standing along the back wall, teenagers lingering by the snack table, pretending not to care. Beverly strolled in 10 minutes late, wearing a blazer the color of entitlement and carrying a binder thick enough to qualify as a weapon in most jurisdictions. She greeted people like a senator at a fundraiser. I let her start. She clicked through a slideshow of community upgrades. Hedge trimming, mailbox repainting, her standing in front of my vandalized panels like she'd restored the Sistine Chapel. She said the words unauthorized installation so many times you'd think I built a missile silo, not a solar node. Then she opened the floor. I stood, calm as I could, holding a tiny remote in one hand and a flash drive in the other. I walked to the front, nodded to the crowd, and clicked. The screen lit up with footage. Beverly, at midnight, roller in hand, humming her off-brand aria while smearing beige across a $14,000 0-cent solar installation. I let it play, no narration, just silence and the occasional nervous cough from the audience. Then I pulled up the original contract, projected full size with every name in bold. This was approved, I said, maintained, supported. Until the board changed, Beverly tried to cut in, claimed it was fabricated, deep-faked, unvetted. But then Phil stepped forward from the crowd holding a beat-up cardboard box full of originals. He spread them out like a poker hand from hell. Votes, payments, maintenance logs, real ink, real signatures. He said, "That's my name, that's hers, and this," he pointed to the date, "was when she voted to approve the very system she now claims is illegal." The room buzzed. Not loud, but deadly quiet, like everyone was processing the same thing at once. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a long game. And Beverly hadn't just lied. She'd plotted. You could see it in her face, the shift. Her chin lifted, eyes narrowed, smile frozen like a screenshot buffering mid-glitch. But she didn't yell. Didn't cry. She just stood there, absorbing the silence like it fed her. And that's when it hit me. Karen is a role. But Beverly? Beverly is a whole ecosystem. She's not just a bossy neighbor with a power complex. She's a bureaucratic arsonist, burning down memory one page at a time, all while smiling like she's hosting a bake sale. And if you think this was the climax? Not even close, because just when we thought we'd dragged the truth into the light, the shadows started fighting back. And in the next part, the camera turns towards something we never expected, something watching all of us, even before we knew the game had begun. So stay close. The grid might have gone offline. But the real story? It's just coming online now. I've always believed in backup plans. Not because I'm paranoid, though after this maybe I should be, But because when you've lived in a neighborhood run by an HOA president with a flair for sabotage and an Instagram for beige walls, you learn to keep one step ahead. So while the solar grid was toast and the HOA contract had been replaced with what I can only describe as bureaucratic fan fiction, there was still one part of my original system Beverly didn't know about. A dummy panel tucked behind an attic vent, wired to a black box that didn't power anything. It just watched, quietly, always. I hadn't even documented it in the design specs. It was my insurance policy. I fired it up and rolled back the footage to a few nights before the Great Beige Massacre, and there she was. Again, Beverly hauling boxes out of her trunk and into the HOA storage shed. Not one, not two, but a parade of heavy containers that looked more CIA than HOA. Now, the shed in question hadn't been used for years. Officially, it stored folding chairs, a few tables, and some sad plastic pumpkins from the HOA's last attempt at a fall festival. But the way Beverly struggled with those boxes, even with a dolly, told me this wasn't craft supplies. I zoomed in and, for one split second, caught a logo stamped on the side of a box. A black square with a vendor code I hadn't seen in years. It was surveillance equipment. From the same company we used when I first built the grid. And that's when it hit me. Beverly hadn't just destroyed my system, she was building her own. Quietly, privately, and probably for reasons that had nothing to do with community safety. I knew I couldn't go in alone. So I made a call to Joel, a former classmate turned cybersecurity contractor who, for legal purposes, I'll just say has a creative approach to locks and encrypt. I told him it involved an HOA president, a storage shed, and possibly a criminal conspiracy. He laughed and said, "Sounds like a Tuesday. I'm in." We waited until just after sunset. Joel looped the exterior cameras using his tablet. Don't ask how. And we slipped onto the HOA grounds like two dads who'd forgotten their kids' soccer snacks. The shed had a digital padlock with a biometric scanner. Joel took one look, pulled out a device smaller than a deck of cards, pressed it to the panel, and ran a script. 20 seconds later, click. The door swung open, and we stepped into the kind of scene that makes your spine whisper, "Oh no." No chairs, no pumpkins, just shelves stacked with uninstalled cameras, signal boosters, a hardwired server hub humming quietly in the back. A blinking green light confirmed it was already live. Beverly wasn't planning a new system. She'd already launched it. No approval, no vote, no oversight. Just a private surveillance network funded with money that sure as hell wasn't on the public HOA budget. Joel pulled up the server's last accessed files and played the most recent clip. What we saw made the room feel colder. It was a live camera feed. Not from a street corner, not from a public entrance, but from someone's backyard. The Thompsons. And right there on screen was their teenage daughter playing by the pool. The camera angle wasn't just invasive, it was surgical. High enough to see into windows, focused enough to zoom. Timestamped, cataloged. The folder wasn't labeled test footage or grid calibration. It was labeled with a family name. And beneath it, dozens more folders, each named after a household on our block. Joel didn't say a word, just started downloading the drive. We didn't touch anything. We didn't need to. We took photos, archived system logs, and backed up the files to 3 separate devices. Then we locked the shed exactly how we found it. And that's when the weight of it all settled in. This wasn't an overreach. This wasn't some misguided upgrade project. This was illegal surveillance, premeditated, unauthorized, and aimed squarely at families who had no idea they were being watched. When I got home, I couldn't sit still. I paced, I stared at my phone. Then I sat down and did what needed to be done. I compiled the photos, the video clips, the timestamps. I wrote a report. Clean, factual, no speculation, just evidence. And I sent it, anonymously, to the County Compliance Board and the District Attorney's Office. But I didn't stop there. I made a second package. One I'd show the neighborhood myself, because what Beverly had done didn't just violate privacy. It broke trust, it broke safety, and it crossed a line that no amount of paint could cover. This wasn't HOA business. This wasn't policy oversight. This was criminal voyeurism wrapped in HOA stationery. And the worst part? I had a feeling she wasn't working alone. What we found in that shed was just the beginning, and in the next part, the retaliation begins, because you don't expose someone like Beverly and expect her to go quietly, not when she still has cards to play. The thing about exposing someone like Beverly is you never catch her off guard. She's already spinning the next version of reality before you've finished printing the truth. I knew she wouldn't take the shed discovery lying down, but I didn't expect her to move this fast. Less than 48 hours after I submitted the evidence to the DA's office, I woke up to a fresh HOA scandal plastered all over our neighborhood gates. Cheaply printed flyers accusing me of being the villain. "Rogue resident compromises community security," the headline read, complete with a blurry photo of me installing solar panels like I was wiring explosives. The flyer accused me of unauthorized data collection, manipulating camera feeds, and endangering families. She even implied I was profiting off neighborhood data, which would have been hilarious if it wasn't so dangerously believable. The language was slippery, not quite lies, but half-truths marinated in fear. And the worst part? It worked on some people, because when fear walks into the room, the truth doesn't always get a seat. I saw it in my neighbors' eyes. The ones who used to wave now nodded cautiously, like I'd become a suspiciously friendly ghost. One woman whispered, "You didn't really watch all of us, right?" And that's when I realized Beverly hadn't just created a smear, she'd flipped the mirror. Everything I exposed about her, she turned around and projected onto me. Classic manipulation: accuse your accuser first, and loudly. I knew I had to act fast, not defensively, but openly. So I called for an emergency town meeting. No HOA vote, no board approval, just a message sent to every resident. I'll be presenting direct evidence of surveillance misconduct and the origin of the grid. If you care about your family's safety and your right to privacy, be there. That night, they came. All of them. More than I'd ever seen in one room, short of a fire drill or a bake sale with free wine. Folding chairs were packed. People were standing against the walls, and teens hovered in the back, pretending not to listen. But they were listening. I didn't start with accusations. I started with an apology. I told them the truth of how the original system had been installed, how it was authorized, and how I'd maintained it after funding stopped. I explained the hidden node, why it existed, and how it ultimately revealed what Beverly had been doing behind closed doors, or more accurately, behind locked sheds. Then I showed the footage, not the most disturbing clips. Just enough to show the pattern. Cameras aimed into yards, over fences, into windows, timestamps, equipment IDs, server access logs, and receipts linking the equipment to the HOA's discretionary fund. I kept my tone flat. No drama, just facts, because when you speak with clarity, the noise starts to fall away. But it wasn't my voice that changed everything. It was a teenager in the second row. He stood up, quietly, and said, "One of those cameras was pointed at my sister's window. It's in the footage." The room went dead silent. No coughs, no shuffling, just stillness, the kind that only comes when reality crashes through the wall like a wave. Beverly stood, calm, controlled. She said the footage was taken out of context, that the system was a temporary modernization initiative designed to phase out the outdated solar grid. She claimed the old setup had become unstable and that she was trying to protect the community by creating something more centralized and professional. She even called the shed server a pilot program meant to test viability before rollout. It was polished, precise, a word salad with just enough dressing to smell like truth, but this time the room wasn't biting. A woman in the back asked, "If it was a pilot, why hide it?" A man near the front followed with, "Why was there no vote?" Then another voice, louder now, "Why was my kid's face on your test server?" Beverly's armor cracked just slightly. The smile wobbled. She tried to pivot. Blame outdated records, staff miscommunication, the previous board's poor documentation. But the more she talked, the more her words floated in the air like helium-filled excuses, weightless and drifting toward the exit. Someone called for a show of hands vote. Not official, just a pulse check. Do we trust Beverly to continue leading this HOA? Not a single hand went up. Another vote. Should we request an external inquiry into HOA operations? Every hand. Every single one. Even the ones that hesitated before. Beverly stood frozen, still holding that same binder from the last meeting, like it was going to shield her from consequence. But binders don't block truth, and this time no amount of beige paint was going to cover what had come to light. She turned, walked straight out the door, and didn't say a word. Not to me, not to anyone. Just the sound of her heels on the tile floor disappearing into the night. And as she left, I realized something simple, almost poetic. She'd tried to paint over the truth, the way she painted over those panels, but this time, the truth stained back. And in the next part, that stain, it leads somewhere darker. Because as bad as Beverly was, I was starting to wonder if she'd been building her own empire, or if she was just the first brick in something bigger. The morning after Beverly walked out of that meeting in silence, I should have felt peace, vindication, maybe even a little relief, but instead I felt watched. You know that feeling like someone else is in the room even when you're alone? It crawled up the back of my neck every time I sat at my desk. That's when I noticed it, an odd glint behind the bookshelf. Not a reflection, not dust. A lens, tucked inside the molding like it belonged there, small enough to miss, precise enough to aim dead at my work surface. It wasn't mine, wasn't connected to anything I'd installed. I pulled it out with tweezers and stared at it like it had just whispered my secrets. And in that moment, I realized Beverly hadn't just tried to control the narrative. She had planted herself inside my life, watching from behind walls she had no right to touch. This wasn't pettiness, it was invasion, and the rules had officially changed. I called Officer Hart from the sheriff's office, told him everything, the footage, the shed, the server, and now this. A live feed camera hidden in my own home. I didn't email it, I didn't text, I didn't want anything traceable. Hart showed up within the hour, eyes sharp, voice low. When he saw the footage and the device, he didn't blink. He made 2 calls, one to a judge, one to the county cybercrimes unit. Less than 48 hours later, a warrant was signed and the real unraveling began. The HOA office was raided, the shed opened again, Beverly's home searched top to bottom. What they found confirmed what I'd already feared. Blueprints for the entire neighborhood's surveillance. Folders labeled with addresses, incident notes, and something called election insurance. It was a strategy to control board votes, offering to waive minor fines in exchange for loyalty. Manipulation in pastels. Blackmail wrapped in policy. She didn't just want control. She wanted permanence, the kind of grip that outlives memory. She wasn't building a security system. She was building a shadow government. Quiet, sanitized, and engineered to look like order while functioning like a dictatorship. The server held files labeled Compliance Escalation, complete with scripts, talking points, and notes on which residents were emotionally pliable. My name, labeled Rogue Architect. I laughed when I saw it, part insult, part compliment. But the list didn't end with me. There were tabs for almost every neighbor. Family details, notes about lawn habits, even one folder with printed screenshots of neighborhood group chats, annotated like they were surveillance transcripts. The DA moved quickly. Charges were filed: illegal surveillance, misuse of HOA funds, wire fraud, and criminal harassment. And just like that, Beverly went from queen of the cul-de-sac to defendant in a county courtroom. But justice doesn't always feel triumphant. The neighborhood had been split open. Trust was fractured. Curtains stayed shut longer. Conversations got shorter. But slowly, quietly, things started coming back together. We rebuilt the grid, this time distributed across 4 rooftops, with full documentation, full consent, and a rotating oversight committee made up of actual volunteers. Nora came back. Turns out Beverly had bowled her out with a threat of false embezzlement, a lie so cruel it sent her packing to Florida. But she returned like a librarian on a mission, digging through old records with the kind of joy only people with highlighters understand. Phil agreed to be interim HOA president, reluctantly, but with a clipboard. We rewrote policies, added transparency clauses, and even scheduled quarterly Ask Me Anything night. Real reform, real accountability. Not perfect, but breathing. You could feel the neighborhood exhale just a little. Until the mail came. No return address, just a flash drive inside a padded envelope and a note in scratchy handwriting. You won this time, but I wasn't working alone. I plugged it in, carefully offline, and opened the only file. A spreadsheet. Names, emails, HOA presidents from other towns, vendor contracts, shared login credentials, and one tab labeled Mutual Interests. It included bulk surveillance orders from the same company Beverly had used, only the billing addresses were spread across 3 counties. It wasn't just her. The beige revolution wasn't local. It was spreading, quietly, efficiently, disguised as neighborhood management. And if I'd stumbled into it by accident, how many others were still sleeping under its watchful eye? So I turned the flash drive over to the DA, and I started writing everything down, every detail, every timestamp, every receipt. Because some people build fences to keep danger out. Some build systems to control the inside, but sometimes the only firewall we have is a neighbor with a memory and a backup drive. And as long as I live here, I'll be watching. Not with cameras, not with paranoia, but with the kind of vigilance that only comes from learning the hard way. Silence isn't peace. It's just the sound right before the wrong people get too comfortable. And not in this neighborhood. Not again. Looking back now, I don't think this story was ever really about solar panels, or HOA bylaws, or even Beverly Klein. Those were just the surface scratches. What this story taught me, what I hope it showed you, is that power doesn't always show up wearing a badge or banging on your door. Sometimes it wears beige cardigans, speaks in committee minutes, and smiles while it rewrites the rules. But if one neighbor, just one, refuses to stay quiet, the whole system starts to crack. And that crack, that's where the light gets in. The real lesson here isn't that bad people exist. We already know that. The lesson is how easy it is for good people to look away when the manipulation sounds polite or when the lies are dressed up as policy. But truth isn't fragile. It just needs someone to carry it, someone stubborn enough to back up their receipts, speak up in the quiet, and remind the rest of us that our homes aren't just buildings. They're boundaries, and boundaries deserve protection, not from the outside world, but from the ones who pretend to be protecting us while they build little kingdoms behind the shed. So if you found value in this story, if it made you think twice about what's written in small print or who holds the clipboard, then leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from or share your own neighborhood war story. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories with justice, twists, and truth that doesn't ask for permission, go ahead and like this video. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Because trust me, the next story, it might just be happening down your street.